How's that? Et après tout, c'est ça. Je m'excuse. Je dois faire mon présentation en franglais à cause de j'ai beaucoup de respect pour la langue française. C'est la raison que je dois parler en anglais. Je m'excuse. J'ai fait le choix de cette image-là à cause de cette réponse de Nathalie. I appreciated very much her conjuring of the word magic, and I'll speak more to that when we get to actually speak. But many of the ideas that have been already brought forward, ideas of magic, of the sublime, of making concrete or refusing concretization, are ideas that very much are within my practice. So I also should say that I have a failing, which I consider to be my strong point, which I am a responder. I tend not to have something entirely concrete to present at every moment, as much as I'm in response to the set of circumstances, including the immediate here. I actually was listening with great attention to everything you had to say, and I'm quite excited to be here to have the conversation. So I'm going to start just with a tiny bit of background so you can understand where I'm coming from. But I should go to the first slide first. I know it's horrible to start with text. The reason why I want to show this introduction of the Studio XX project Matricule, I wrote the brief for that project, and it's an online database that is mutable and ongoing. The reason why I bring it up at all is not because of a project or an application of my kind of thinking, as much as to discuss the difference between data visualization and essentially truly hypermediatic presentation, when you refuse to concretize something as complex as a history. You set in motion something more close to the actual. I'm very interested in this idea of abstraction being in fact much more real than most of the things we attempt to locate temporally or spatially. So you can go there and see it, but what's critical to me is this is what the database looks like, or this is one way in. Of course, there's always multiple points of access to something that will make any sense at all, but one of the ways you're able to access it is through this image, and this image is constantly changing. Depending on the people that put additional information to it, you will have a new X added, and the colors of the X, there is an index, much like any other kind of cartography. It will indicate either whether it's a text or an image or even a recording or a video, whatever kind of input is being placed there will exist as something that will change what we see as a kind of cartography or mappage. I'm very interested in this idea of fluid, multiple, crystalline representations of both selves, but activities of being and how we manifest ourselves through methods of production. So one of the things I'm very interested in is placing the storyteller or the user at the point of construction. And I do this in my own work as well. So in this case, I was very much referring to the potential of an oral tradition being able to manifest digitally. And I know there's a lot of language about this, but it tends to be, or all too often, it is about trying to transpose from one media into another, as opposed to recognizing the specificity of each medium. And I'm particularly interested in media specificity, and my primary medium is space. And I manifest my work, I hope that you're able to engage in it through the use of this leaky thing that we wander through the world with, the leaky body. So again, just to revisit the idea of an image as opposed to a textual translation of experience and something which is mutable and constantly changing. Critical to this is understanding the distinction between data and information. And this, for people that are interested in cybernetics and information theories and important histories of the last century and beyond, understand the difference between data and information. And I'm particularly interested in information, which has been described within those fields as the unknown. It's actually what is unquantifiable. It's that which we have to seek out. It's that which is going to become. So as I work with this idea, as opposed to trying to illustrate or define a set of circumstances, I put myself in a very difficult position because I will basically work at constructing very complex surfaces or things that can be read as surfaces. And once we get closer to those surfaces, we recognize them to be constantly changing. It's not solid, it's not static, it's moving. I also address issues of beauty persistently in my work, and I come to beauty from an intensely political place. That's often something that's overwritten, though people are now starting to re-engage with the idea of aesthetics and beauty as being not only political, because it's most often emblematic of experience, and it relates directly to the body, and how can a body within the polis be anything but political? It also is temporally locatable. And because it's temporally locatable, we can discuss it again as something that's deeply political. The experience that this body will have and what this body will experience as beauty, and there's something consensual or collusional to what we decide is attractive within any one society at any one moment in time, and again fractured within that society, it starts to get more and more interesting to me. I wanted to talk about this idea of complex surfaces and thinking specifically about contemporary circumstance, where we've seen something which is very complex and multiple come to be viewed as a solid and a whole, and how there are times that this is in fact very useful. Oh, sorry. Let's see if I can make this happen. I'm thinking in particular of the manifestation that happened yesterday, because our experience of it is that there were specific moments that were discernible as discrete, but if you wanted to try and understand that experience, in fact, you had to, sorry you guys, because obviously this was very recent information. I was struggling with it this morning as I was also dealing with my students. I was very interested at how these discrete experiences that very quickly became understood as images online were also very quickly turned into something that was really only understandable from an image perspective, even though it had commercial effects, immediate commercial effects. Obviously, people were planning for it and moving forward in solidarity and in contradiction. But when we started to really fully understand it was when we were able to view it from above. It became understood as a very large, massive, actually topological circumstance when we started to see it from a perspective that was not quite so clear. This idea of the abstraction actually starting to manifest the real is what I'm getting at here. You start to understand the power of something that was happening when we no longer are able to view the particulars. This is remarkable to me. Apparently I'm also getting a phone call. So in this demonstration of sort of images wherein the abstract begins to actually better represent the whole than any of the individual portraits might have, or pixels or panels, it gets at what I do within my physical practice as well. And I thought I would show you how I draw on some of these things. This is a video that was the lighting of a project at Parisian Laundry that you saw. And instead of actually lighting my work, I tend to use media production within the site to inform the work. In this case, it's flying birds, something deeply romantic. Everybody loves flying birds. People often criticize my work for being beautiful, or wherein beauty can step aside from the intellectual. But what they don't realize is this is incredibly social critique, like it's really savvy social critique that I'm doing, because this very beautiful, I'm being funny there, though it may not translate, this incredibly romantic and beautiful image of these many flying birds in black and white was in fact made with 28 clips taken off of YouTube. Because if you go looking for pictures of flying birds on YouTube, you'll find no less than 37,000 of them. In fact, much more, and new ones are added every day. So my suggestion of having this image that was somehow collectively constructed, but was altered and made romantic, made beautiful by my skills and applications within media technology, which seems funny to say today. But by re-photographing these videos on my screen using a very low-tech phone camera and desaturating all of the color and then stringing it together, it became something that people were able to both deny and engage in. It became a story that was told by many. So I'm interested in this idea of creating complex surfaces that then need to be considered in a new way. This is an example of another video that became central to the piece that I had at the Triennale Québécoise. And as you start to watch it, you'll see again there's this kind of complex surface that seems topological, perhaps geographical, and as it starts to activate itself, you see things moving within it. It becomes apparent to some what's happening, though not until you, it depends on your knowledge of things. Do you know what this is?
Well, I don't know what it is, but I can imagine how it's done.
It's my blood. Yeah, it's my blood under a microscope, and most people's blood under an electronic microscope, you'll see these same kind of things. You'll see the hemoglobin. You'll see the various components of your blood, but and most blood under a microscope will only seem active for about 2 minutes. But I happen to have a blood disorder that means that my blood doesn't clot, which means that I make really good blood movies. But it's quite interesting to watch what happens with as you see this blood. Like people often, I work under the belief that there is no such thing as metaphor, which is many people can trace. You can pace that through Deleuze and Guattari. You can trace it. But when I'm saying that here, I'm saying it because people describe much art as self-referential or portraiture. Most people's artwork is somehow a portrait of themselves. The author is not dead, she's sitting right here. And in this case, I'm giving you my blood as the example of the image of me. And as you watch it dying, it will start to create a better image and a more interesting surface for you to watch. It's remarkable, this black that's happening, which very much looks like some sort of lunar passage, or if you're looking at a river system, tributaries from the moon, you start to actually see what's happening inside of me. Well, actually, this is when it comes outside of me. But this became the surface or the projection within that work, and how it was seen there was on a very complex screen that I had built. That was made of feathers. Sorry, I'm going to close some of these guys. So the projection was on the ground, but also on the surface. And so the important thing here is that while you walk through this space, which is a 21-foot long pavilion with a lining of feathers, there were over 5,210 tiges with 3 feathers tied to each of them. When you walk through that space, each of those feathers moved. And the surface of the walls started to replicate what was happening on the floor and what was happening with my blood. Things were moving. And I will just show you one last tiny thing because I know we have to go quickly.
2 minutes.
2 minutes?
2 minutes.
This is the original of that video, And once you see it within the floral sort of explosion of the blood and you start to recognize the chroma of it, its experience is incredibly altered. And so core to this idea of aesthetics being not purely visual but experiential, it's the way the word began. Aesthetikos was an experience of the body determined sensorially. And while it has been co-opted into a scopophiliac presentation in the past, well, since the so-called Enlightenment, I'm intrigued by returning it to the body and recognizing sort of this opportunity to work within hypermedia using this fallible but intriguing utensil to interpret it. I recognize tools are required to bring certain things within the realm of experience of this body, but those extensions, because we've so far really only built ones that are extensions of skills we already have, where our imagination seems stymied as we build tools that only further what we already know. I'm excited about a return to the physical in order to perhaps expand those notions. Things that have given me great hope, because I am an exceptionally optimistic person at core, are and this is kind of an old story, but it's always a good one to discuss, is how NASA's most important person right now, outside of capitalist concerns, though tied to capitalist concerns, is actually an orgamist or a folder who's been able to start solving some of the geometric problems they're having with making a device that will be able to capture solar energy. You can imagine attempting to capture solar energy on the ground. We need to make such large surfaces to bring in that energy that we're removing landscape needed for farming and people. But because certain forms can only be formed physically, we can only do the geometry up to the 5th dimension. But if you're working within folding technologies, they've actually been able to build solar reflectors and containers that are the size of football fields that actually fit into a garbage can. And so they're able to take those to space and unfold them. They cannot figure this out numerically, and they can only do it by physically folding the stuff. This is not an either-or suggestion. We obviously suffer deeply as an innumerable, like we suffer from innumeracy as much as illiteracy in our society, but recognizing these differences of knowledges and the discussion that needs to happen between them is perhaps the method with which we will be able to start imagining and building those things beyond the skills that we physically already own.